The Christmas season is drawing to a close. The wise ones are safely back in Persia. Mary and Joseph are getting on with the task of raising a family. And we've moved on too. Decorations have been put away, mostly. Christmas goodies have all been eaten quickly. And we've started to browse Valentine's merchandise, right? And we're not that sad to see Christmas go. Because this year, like last, the holidays have been tainted by the pandemic. We simply couldn't do everything we wanted or see everyone we hoped to. Even church felt diminished with so few people in the pews. It doesn't feel like Christmas has been the refrain 2 years in a row. But that might not really be true. Because you see, the celebrations we think of as a proper Christmas were basically invented by the Victorians. Christmas trees and cards and most of our carols come from that period. Now, Christmastide partying was common for about 1,000 years, but it evolved more from pagan festivals than it did from the Nativity. So when the Puritans came along, the first thing they did was do away with Christmas. Not in church, of course, but all of the rest of the stuff. And here in Massachusetts, Christmas celebrations were banned from 1659 to 1681.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, so over 20 years, no Christmas at all. Although a note I read said that there's no record of any arrests. But there was no public holiday. Christmas as a public holiday didn't happen in Massachusetts till 1856.
So you went to church, though?
You went to church, and then you went back to work. Shops were open, life went on, yeah. Oh. Partying was not allowed. So right from the very beginning, there's been celebration, but there's also been quietness and even sadness about Christmas. So actually, the last 2 years have been closer to the real Christmas than for the last 150. And the Gospels echo that. Now, Luke tells about angels announcing great news of great joy to shepherds. And Matthew adds a wonderful story about joyful astronomers. And we know for sure that the births of Jesus and Johnny caused immense happiness to their parents. But the overall tone of these narratives is less one of joy or more one of uncertainty and even fear. Little happened the way people thought or hoped they would happen. Disappointment, discouragement, and danger were very real to everyone involved. Let's begin with Elizabeth, an elderly primate, an elderly lady having her first baby. She had to cope with a high-risk pregnancy and her husband's sudden neurological illness. It must have been a terrible 9 months, full of anxiety and worry. We don't hear anything about Johnny's birth or childhood. We can be sure that his mum and dad doted on him, their only boy, their only child. And then, the moment he was old enough, he moved out to the wilderness. Probably to join the radical Essenes sect. They were kind of a God's coming again soon sect, very radical. How hard that must have been for his parents. Their only child leaving home like that. They must have missed him terribly. And they must have needed him badly, because John's parents were old. We know that from his birth story. They were probably in their late 50s, early 60s, which was old age in those days. They would have expected they could depend on him financially. And practically, they would have hoped for a good daughter-in-law who would have taken care of them, and grandchildren to bring them joy. But none of that happened. Instead, John basically abandoned them. Now we know that he was doing God's work, and so did his parents. But couldn't he have been a priest like his dad? Then he would have been around. Why did he have to go so far away? John had very proud but very sad parents. And then he got himself executed. Now the scandal of Herod marrying his brother's wife was common knowledge. Everybody knew about it, but John couldn't keep quiet. He went on and on about how sinful it was and how terrible they were, until Herodias shut him up permanently. And I bet Mum and Dad sat at home crying, throwing things, saying, why couldn't he have left it alone? They had so much joy when he was a boy, and then so much sadness and fear and overwhelming grief. Christmas wasn't that joyful for them. Just as it isn't for many mums and dads who have tough parenting journeys. Tough parenting journeys like Mary and Joseph had. Now, Mary had a shock announcement of a pregnancy. She had a warm and wonderful surprise of Joseph sticking with her. And she must have thought that after that, things would go as they normally went for young couples and their babies. You deliver the baby in your own home, surrounded by your female relatives. Men would be out in the square till it was all over. Instead, they had to go on a road trip. She had to deliver in someone else's house with complete strangers. That wasn't what she'd planned, nor the motley assortment of visitors who came by. They certainly did childbirth differently in Bethlehem. But Mary had her precious little boy, and Joseph was an awesome husband and dad, and even his relatives were lovely. They took them in, although they must have heard the rumors. Things were okay. Things were going to be okay. And then Mary and Joseph went to the temple to observe the required rituals. A sacrifice to purify Mary from childbirth, and one to give thanks for the safe delivery of their newborn. It was like an infant dedication service, church service followed by a party, downstairs in the hall or back in the house. But that didn't go as planned, did it? Some old man comes up to them and tells them that their beautiful baby would grow up to pierce Mary's soul. Oh my, what a terrible thing to say to a new mum. Instant postpartum depression. Really, right? Simeon's words must have shocked Mary and Joseph to the core and scared them spitless. No wonder they fled to Egypt. Mary and Joseph found themselves in the same position that parents do today when they hear that their newborn has a significant illness or disability. The world comes crashing down around them. But what do they do next? What do parents do next when they get that bad news? Your child needs heart surgery today. Your child has Down syndrome. Your child has some genetic defect. Parents pick themselves up and they keep going. They have to, for the sake of the child. And modern mums and dads have access to medical care and supportive services if they can afford them, so that everything that can be done is done. But that still leaves that big gaping fear in the center of their hearts. So if they are people of faith, they enlist everyone they know as prayer partners. Some years ago, I went to see my doctor, but he needed the care that day because he had just diagnosed a young woman with juvenile Huntington's disease. Do you have that in your group home? Do you have people with Huntington's? It's a progressive neurological disease. It's awful. And juvenile, as you can imagine, is even worse. And he had just diagnosed her, and he felt so bad about that. And then he heard that the family had told the whole church. And that shocked him, because he thought it was so dreadful, you should keep it quiet. But in actual fact, we knew of that family. We hadn't heard of the diagnosis, but we knew of that family. The dad was a Baptist minister. And the moment they were told this dreadful, dreadful news, they turned to the whole church and asked them to accompany them by prayer and by presence on their tough journey. How else could you cope? When bad things happen to our kids, we seek out the best help available, and we muster all the prayer support we can find. And Mary and Joseph were no different. Simeon's words were terrifying, but they weren't totally surprising. Being called to serve God always comes with risks. And so they lifted up their baby and themselves in prayer, and they got their friends and family to support them in prayer also. Young Jesus was much loved and much prayed for, just like young Johnny in his family faith circle. In Advent, we muse that Elizabeth and Mary started a high-risk pregnancy support group. Well, maybe they also organized a group for parents of children with complex needs, right? Because support is that third arm of doing the practical stuff, doing the praying stuff, and getting support. When life doesn't turn out the way we'd hoped, adjustments have to be made. We must adapt, and we must pray. Otherwise, none of it works. And they both work better when we're supported by faith-filled friends. And those astronomers who visited Jesus did a lot of adapting. And we can guess a lot of praying. When they set off to Jerusalem, the wise ones were sure they were going to pay their respects to a little prince in a royal palace. But Herod made it crystal clear there's nothing to see here. So the pilgrims kept right on journeying and right on praying, right up to the front door of the new family. Now Matthew tells us that the guiding star stopped above Jesus' lodgings. Anybody have a problem with that bit of the story?
Stars don't stop.
Yes, stars don't stop, exactly. So what we can interpret that is as that the star was somewhere over the Bethlehem sky when they got to Bethlehem and were looking for baby Jesus. But the star, from their perspective, would have kept on moving. So what did they have to do then, these men? Bethlehem was a town of probably a few hundred. It wasn't a big place, say 500 or so. What do you have to do? There's a star overhead in the night sky. What do you have to do to find this baby? Ask, right? So what are they going to ask?
Did you have a baby boy?
Yeah. Or is there a prince?
Yes, where's the palace?
Yeah, where's the palace? Has a prince been born? Can you imagine going to Washington and going to the projects and saying, I've come to see the president,
Yes.
right?
Right.
They think you were daft.
Yeah.
They might think you're a terrorist. Ask for the president in Washington, you'd be lucky if you weren't shot. But these men had the courage that it took to go around and knock on doors and say, is there a baby boy here? Has a prince been born here? And people were just as suspicious in those days as today. Well, nobody had a gun. You weren't going to get shot. But, with Herod and Rome in charge, people were distrustful and fearful. And they might have said, what are you doing knocking on my door? Who are you? Go away. It took a lot of courage for those foreigners to keep on searching for the Joseph family. And Matthew tells us they were filled with joy. You bet they were. They found the baby and they weren't killed in the process. They were truly joyful. We might have run away at that point when Herod issued his threats, when it was clear it was going to be hard to find the baby. When expectations fail, it's tempting to cut and run. But that only leads to further loss. further disappointment. These brave men continued their quest until they reached their goal. 1 special baby seen, 3 luxury gifts given, trip worthwhile. Trip worthwhile. That is the Christmas message. That however difficult or dark our road, good will come of the journey. That whatever obstacles, setbacks, and disappointments we encounter, God is still at work in our lives. As Paul wrote to the church in Rome, good will come from every detail, even the sad and the bad. The bewildered magi, the worried mums, the uncertain dads. Their stories are ours too. We know what disappointment feels like, and discouragement. We know how painful it is to see dreams collapse. That's why we've been given these Bible stories, to inspire us to trust in God, whatever road we're on, to instill in us God's promise that He will never, ever leave us alone, to insist that nativity is not just for Christmas. Amen. Amen. Amen.